Right now on the Newsmaker Hotline, we have Senator Mike Lee, a senator from Utah, and a very good day to have him. He's had some very strong things to say about the gun legislation that appears to be, it's going to be considered in the United States Senate. Senator Lee, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you. It's good to be with you.
All right, so let's start out. You had some very strong things to say about this legislation. It seems to me that things started to come together on this legislation, that it started to move forward in the Senate in a serious way once Pat Toomey and Joe Manchin got together and said, we've come up with a bipartisan solution to this background check issue. And then all of a sudden, things just sort of, all the talk of the filibuster evaporated, and the vote came together. But really, what we had at that particular moment was nothing more than just a few talking points.
That's right. We had an idea. We had a few bullet points, and we had no legislative text. It's one of the things that's disturbing to me is that people in this town are often willing to vote to proceed to something without actually knowing what it is. You know, I've seen a few bill summaries of it, but until late last night, we didn't have any legislative text.
Well,
we're going through that right now.
Isn't it true that the entire legislation is sort of in flux right now, that it's still being sort of written as we go? So we've decided to go forward and consider a measure that really hasn't even been written yet.
Yeah, that's right. This was to become the centerpiece of what would be considered by the Senate. And it wasn't even in text form when the Senate moved to proceed to it. I find that alarming, somewhat reminiscent of what happened just a few months ago in the fiscal cliff deal, when we received legislation at 1:36 a.m. on New Year's Eve, and we were called to vote for it at 1:42 a.m., and all but a small handful of senators voted for it. And I found that very disturbing as well. So this is kind of a pattern that we've gotten into where somebody comes up and says, oh, I've got a great bipartisan piece of legislation. It's not ready yet, but trust me, you're going to love it. And so people jump on board.
Senator Lee, you and Senator Toomey both joined the Senate at the same time. You both came in on that, what we like to call the 2010 Tea Party class. And I know that you have great admiration for your colleague there from Pennsylvania. He has signed his name to this amendment to the bill that supposedly memorializes the whole idea of a universal background check for gun transfers and purchases. This was Senator Toomey yesterday during his press conference.
I don't consider criminal background checks to be gun control. I think it's just common sense.
Do you disagree with that?
I have great respect for Senator Toomey, professionally and politically. He's also a great, close personal friend. I do disagree with him there. This legislation would have the tendency to restrict the rights of law-abiding American citizens while doing little or nothing to prevent the kind of gun violence that we saw at Sandy Hook. And so that's why I'm concerned with it. You know, we've got two basic types of Americans. You've got one group who will consistently, predictably obey the law, almost regardless of what the law says. You've got another group that will not obey the law, almost regardless of what it says. And fortunately, the people in the first group have always predominated in our society. I hope they always will. The rule of law depends on it. But this is the very kind of legislation that's going to restrict the law-abiding and do nothing or very, very little to deter the unlawful conduct of people who already disobey the law.
Senator Lee, let me ask you a question about the process we're about to go through now, because now that this is going to be debated and it'll be voted on in the Senate, I mean, ultimately, Harry Reid has the majority there in the Senate, and something quite possibly is going to get through. But the Republicans have the majority in the House. You would think then that it really wouldn't even be considered in the House, or even if it was considered, it would get voted down with the majorities there. However, Speaker Boehner said yesterday, according to the Washington Post, that he would be willing to take votes on guns, immigration, and the budget to the floor, even if he didn't have a majority of Republicans on his side. What's your advice to your colleague down the corridor there?
You know, I'd have to see his entire statement in context. I wasn't aware of the fact that he had made that statement. It's surprising to me. It's not consistent with what I've normally seen out of the House of Representatives. But, you know, I'm in the Senate, not in the House. I'm not in the business of administering advice on how to run the other body of Congress.
Is there going to be any attempt to slow down the pace of consideration of this measure?
Well, slow it down in the sense that I think it does need to be undertaken on a step-by-step common sense basis. I don't think we should allow emotion to rule the day. We certainly shouldn't adopt things before we've adequately studied them. Again, we didn't get the Toomey language, the Toomey Manchin language until late last night. I was up in the middle of the night reading it, and still digesting it. It takes a while to figure out exactly all the moving parts. But I do think it'll move forward quickly, as in a lot of things will happen within the next week or two, and perhaps it might get to a final vote in that time period.
Senator Lee, you made a statement, I believe it was yesterday, the day before yesterday, about Attorney General Eric Holder and the Office of the Attorney General and what kind of powers they get with this new legislation, based on your understanding and based on what you saw sitting on the Judiciary Committee. Can you expand on that a little bit? What's the concern and danger of what the Attorney General can and can't do now with regard to gun ownership?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so what I was commenting on was the effect of the Schumer legislation that moved through the Senate Judiciary Committee, on which I sit, and moved through the committee just a few weeks ago. And the Schumer background check legislation would require some record keeping in connection with background checks, and it also would have given the Attorney General a certain degree of rulemaking authority with regard to administering, overseeing this law. And it is possible that the Attorney General, either this Attorney General or some Attorney General down the road, if that legislation were enacted into law, could use that to come up with something that would or could end up resembling a gun registration system, which most Americans are very uncomfortable with. I still haven't figured out whether or to what extent this Toomey Manchin language contains anything similar, but we're looking through it to ascertain that.
We haven't talked a lot about the other side of this equation, which is the desire to take guns out of the hands of people who are mentally ill. Now, on its surface, everybody says, well, that sounds like a great idea. But the implementation of that is extremely problematic, is it not?
Well, yeah, it certainly could be. The devil's in the details. Certainly we don't want guns in the hands of mentally insane individuals. But who gets to decide that? And once it's decided, how is it challenged? We're looking here at a very basic fundamental right that the American people have.
All right.
If you're going to allow some third party to just designate someone as ineligible to exercise that right, that needs to be something that can be challenged by the individual affected by it.
Senator Mike Lee from Utah. One last quick question. You say Senator Toomey is your good friend. I don't doubt it. Were you surprised when he came out with this, or did he talk to you before this happened, or was this sort of a surprise to you?
Senator Toomey and I are close friends and allies, and he had been telling me for some time that he was working on language, that he wanted to come up with some compromise language with Senator Manchin. So, no, I wasn't surprised when he came out with it.
All right, Senator Lee, thank you so much for joining us.
Senator Mike Lee from Utah, thanks so much for